The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on live shows.
There's a glorification of using violence at times.
In my little scroll burn that's going on.
This is no longer a high school fight after school. This is something.
How do I know when it's appropriate to respond with violence and then...
Yeah, well, sometimes we share more than we should, right?
This is the After Action Project, and we're bringing you the student's perspective on firearms training. This is the podcast that takes you inside the eyes of the student and the mind of the instructor, from practical to tactical, medical to legal, and everything in between. If there's a course for it, this is your fly-on-the-wall After Action destination. This is the After Action Project.
Tonight we are joined with Tim Larkin, author of When Violence is the Answer. Excuse me. So apologize for taking a week off on you folks, but we're going to blame it all on Judson, and if he doesn't want to accept full blame, then I guess I'll take some partial blame for that as well. Be sure to get any questions that y'all have going in the YouTube chat if you're watching on YouTube. Or over there on the After Action Project Facebook page if you're watching over there. And before we get into this, Tim, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners and our viewers for those folks if they're not familiar with them, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, hi, I'm entering my 27th year as an instructor in close combat. Started out in the military. Did just about everything as far as training hand-to-hand combat in the military, all the units that most people hear about and some that they don't. Around 9/11, I did a course in New York for a bunch of executives, and it was on the 8th and 9th, went home on the 10th, and then on the 11th, 9/11 happened. And the place that I was training was a couple blocks away from World Trade Center, and it was destroyed. 3 of my guys were in there. They all got out. But the stuff that I talked about during that time, I was showing them stuff like you can bring on an airliner, like box cutters and stuff. And that's when I started training more civilians after that. All of a sudden, it just opened up. People were much more accepting with the idea of what it takes to survive, violence at that point. And they were okay with doing some of the things that you have to do when you need to survive violence, and very straightforward information about injuring the human body, all the stuff that I was very easy to talk about in military and law enforcement arenas, actually really got an open reception from a lot of the civilian community, which I always thought the civilians probably weren't necessarily ready for this type of information, because it is uncomfortable information when you're talking about imminent violence and you're talking about shutting down the human body. It's a lot different than, kicking somebody's ass at a bar, or a lot of the stuff that's avoidable that people get involved in all the time. So my specialty is dealing with violence, imminent criminal violence. The assumptions I make are the person, when you'll be facing multiple attackers, those attackers will be bigger, faster, and stronger, and they're going to be carrying weapons. And so those are where all the outliers are taken out. And that's the assumption that you make when you're training for that type of environment. So that's kind of my specialty. I know firsthand injury to the human body. It ended my SEAL career before it even started. I made it all the way through. I had 2 weeks left in training, and a BS diving accident. I blew my eardrums, went into vertigo, and had no control over my body under the water. It ended my ability to dive. But it started my whole career on this idea of injury to the human body. Injury being... people ask all the time, like, are you hurt or are you injured? And everybody knows the difference. Hurt is, you can basically mentally get through being hurt. When you're injured, though, you can't. And injury to the human body really is the Rosetta Stone when it comes to, taking care of yourself and others. And so that's really what we look at. We look at the vulnerabilities in the human body. I go to some really uncomfortable areas to get really good information. And that's kind of my specialty. My specialty is dealing, if it's military and law enforcement, then it's at the end of either the force continuum, or it's where, in the rules of engagement, operator's life is in danger, weapons free, and you're completely ready to do whatever it takes to survive the situation. And that's what's interests me about that area, is that's where you have the least amount of information. I remember when I first started working with the law enforcement community after being, in the military, I remember being shocked that these guys would get to, whatever, level 4, level 5, everybody has a different level on where they're at the end of their force continuum. But what was interesting was they basically all had the same information, which was do whatever it takes, ... And then no information, oh yeah, go after his eyes. Oh, go do this, go do, and then there's no training that way. When you need the most specific information is when it's life or death. And when you're on the line, you need to know exactly what to do and exactly how to do it to somebody, especially if they, the assumptions that we're talking about, multiple attackers, bigger, faster, stronger, and weapons. It's absolutely critical that you don't compete with an individual, that you use the skill sets of destruction.
I want to go into that a little bit further, but before we do that, talk to us about the genesis of the book and what led you to writing a book. And then let's really kind of open up that a little bit. I want to circle back around to that, the assumptions that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's my fourth book. This is the book I wanted to write. During that time, I finally had a publisher that wanted me to write this book. And the reason I mean that is I started this book before the election. And, I'd been on New York Times bestseller with my last book and did really well. And this book was doing gangbusters. It's still doing very, very well. But because the world's changed so much in the last couple of years, as far as what you can and can't say online, I mean, I've had to deal with Facebook. I've had to deal with Google. I've had to deal with everybody else. The very fact that it had violence in the title penalized me. They kicked me off of the New York Times list. They wouldn't put me on just because I had violence, even though I was outselling a lot of the people that were on the list at the time. So the book's been kind of stigmatized because the assumption is that any study of violence somehow makes you violent. And it's the exact opposite that's true in a situation like that. The more, in my experience in the 30 plus years of doing this, the more highly trained somebody is in the lethal aspects of violence, the less likely they are to overreact in any situation or use violence in an unnecessary manner. Because there's no questioning when you're properly trained whether or not injuring somebody is going to work. It really comes down to a function of, does the situation warrant the response? And that's really my specialty. My specialty, I can teach people the most extreme stuff when it comes to striking, kicking, using weapons, all that good stuff. That's great. Anybody can do that. There are a lot of people out there that can do that. Not necessarily the best methods they use, but they can do it. What most people don't do is my goal is to make sure that I minimize the chance of violence ever coming into my client's life. And in order to do that, you have to show them what it really takes to survive a situation where somebody is there, doing, with imminent grievous bodily harm as a threat. And it's a very different world than, say, like competition, martial arts, combat sports, all that great stuff. And I live here in Vegas. I love it. I grew up in combat sports. I grew up in the martial arts. I grew up in competition. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever. The only thing you have to realize is that when you're in a life or death situation, you don't want to be competing with somebody. You don't want to limit yourself in any way, shape, or form. You want to be able to use the most expedient, straightforward, effective measures. And so you have to train accordingly for that.
So in the book, you do a great job kind of putting the two types of violence and kind of comparing and contrasting them. And when the title of the book, When Violence is the Answer, I can see how some folks, the New York Times, but okay, maybe this isn't a book we want on the list if you look at the cover alone. But you talk about and you describe how a woman who's being attacked and the violence that's being used against her is one type of violence. And then the appropriate response from her is absolutely a violent response, and how we really want to judge her use of violence based on the circumstances that she's in. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that and why that's important for people to really understand and grasp?
Yeah, there's a glorification out there of, with action movies and with even with like the UFC and everything. There's a glorification of using violence at times, to where it's almost like, comical. And the problem that we have is violence is very different than competing. Violence is very straightforward. There's nothing to be learned with violence. I mean, probably the best way to talk about it is, schoolyard, after school. I know when I grew up, they still allowed you to fight. Well, they didn't allow us to fight, but we still fought. But if you were going to be called out by the school bully at the end of the day, the school talked about it all day. That was a huge thing. And everybody wanted to go to the fight after. The reason they wanted to go after the fight after, because there was really good social information there. It was a hierarchy thing. Is the bully and his, minions, are they going to stay in power right now? Or is one of the kids, one of the lower strata kids going to stand up to him and actually overturn the bully? And now there's going to be a whole new social structure. And so there was a lot of information that everybody wanted to do. And they get excited and yell, fight, fight, fight. And then the fight starts. And everybody gets really excited to see what the outcome is. Now, if you took that same situation and the kid that was getting picked on by the bully and called out by the bully, he shows up and out of his backpack, he pulls out, an automatic weapon and starts hosing down the place, everybody would just run. And everybody knows right away, there's nothing to be learned here. Violence has one thing, it does one thing really well. It shuts down people. It shuts off communication. And that's the difference. We inherently recognize that. Where we're getting these weird issues is where people try to justify using violence because they don't like what's going on. They don't like the fact that somebody called them a name. They don't like the fact that somebody disrespected them in some way or said something offensive. And they try to shoehorn into that the ability to use violence. And it's really a very narrow window. The two areas that you're talking about in the book, I call it antisocial aggression, which is the majority of the stuff that gets everybody in trouble. This is where people want to respond with violence. Somebody calls you a name and you want to get in their face. You choose to respond with violence in a situation like that. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is asocial violence. And that's really what I want to prepare my clients for. And that is when you are devoid of choice. You're facing imminent grievous bodily harm. If you do not take action, then you are essentially participating in your own murder. And that's a very different set of standards there. And so it really comes down to choice. With most people, if you have a choice in the situation, it's not time to use violence. The book title comes from kind of a tagline I've used for years. And my tagline that I've used for years goes, violence is rarely the answer. And everybody loves that part of the statement. And then I say ... But when it is, it's the only answer. And that's where there's not a lot of good information of what do you actually, if you actually have to use a tool of violence, how do you do that? How do you go about it? How do you look at it? How do you train for it? How do you, how do you make sure that something is effective versus something that's just, efficient? A lot of people do that. A lot of people, like in the martial arts and combat sport world, will teach you to be incredibly efficient in things that are absolutely ineffective when it comes to getting an injury on the street. And so you have to be very careful of what your goals are when you're dealing with self-protection. You basically want to do the same work that you would do with your gun. You wouldn't use anything that I would teach you on another human being unless it was at the threshold where if you happen to have or could get to your firearm, you would feel justified in deploying your firearm and unloading it in that threat. That's the level that we deal with. And that's a very easy level for us to understand, when you would ever do that. And people get confused a lot. And one of the easier ways to go through the process is if I told you guys, okay, hey, I was just driving, I went to the supermarket and I was just going to park. And right as I went in, this jerk came in his Prius and he grabs my spot and he comes out. And I was so pissed off. I pulled over to the side. He got out of the car. I jacked him up against his car, threw him against there, and just gouged his eye out. And you guys, think, what the hell is this guy talking about? Then you say another situation. I'm in a bar. This guy comes by and he knocks into me, spills a drink, and then tells my wife, that, she's fat. So I slam him, grab him by the hair, throw him down the ground, gouge his eye out. Yeah, people just look at you like, are you freaking crazy? But then I get a third situation. I'm going to pick my daughter up at school. I heard the first shots. Everybody's down. I saw two people drop from being shot. I saw the shooter. There was a malfunction. He was dropping down to do a reload. I didn't know what to do. I charged him as fast as I could, knocked him to the ground. The first thing I saw was his eye, so I took his eye out. The third situation is the one where everybody perks up and says, okay, what did you do? How did you do that? They want to know specifics on exactly how did you get that result? How were you able to do that? How did you train for that? The first two incidences we dismiss because why? Inherently, we know those are criminal. But we make a huge mistake when we look at violence like that and we throw everything out. We think that, okay, that will get me in trouble. That will get me in criminal. Therefore, there's no good information to learn about that particular movement that guy did. He took a guy's eye out. Why would I ever learn that? You have to put everything in the right context for people so they understand, why you would ever teach something like that and when violence is appropriate. And it's really funny because what normally happens is I have a bunch of guys that come in oftentimes, and they're the ones that are really excited and they want to learn. Yeah, I really want to learn this, And you go, fine, come here. And you show them 3 or 4 things of destroying the human body, quickly show them how to take somebody out. And all of a sudden they're, whoa, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. It's like, you don't have a choice on what you want to do. Once you put your hands on somebody and you go into this area, you have no idea what the outcome is going to be. So you have to have a clear, crystal clear understanding of when it would ever be appropriate to use the tool. And that's probably the biggest gift I can give anybody. And that's what I tried to do in the book, is really lay that argument out for people. So if all you did was read the book, you'd have a really good understanding of how to navigate your life as to what you do and what you don't have to respond to.
One of the questions that, people often ask is, well, how do I know when it's appropriate to respond with violence? And then how will I know what level of violence I should respond with? Can you expand on that a little bit more? Going through your book, I would absolutely agree with you. I think that is a big takeaway for the readers of that book. And without giving too much away, can you talk about that a little bit? And how, if somebody attacked me, how do I know what level of force is appropriate to respond with?
Well, it really comes down to what the stakes are. I've had guys, it's funny. I had a couple of guys from a tier 1 unit, and they're good dudes and they're in there. But this one guy literally said, he goes, nobody can take my eye out. I was like, what? And nobody can take my eye out. And it's like, okay, and he goes, yeah, I've had people try it before and they can't do it. And I'm like, my first thought process in there is, what's the stakes? What was it? Was it just some dare or something like that? Those aren't real stakes, because the eye will come out. And I keep going back to the eye, but it goes out like that if you know how to do it, correctly. When you come out, the human body, if you understand how to put injury into the human body, it's a fairly straightforward, easy thing to do. The interesting part is the more you train it in an asocial environment that I was talking about. So when people train with us, there's no sound whatsoever. You don't joke with your person. You don't interact with them in any way, shape, or form. It's basically just a human body that you get to work with. And there's no talking or socializing. Help each other up. You do the movements. You learn how to break the human body apart, and then you come back. And the reason is you don't want any social interference in your training. You don't want to put this information in the wrong part of your brain. You want to put it in the part of your brain that understands that when there's a lack of communication, it's asocial, it's time to get to work. And the only thing that's going to get you out of that situation is to successfully use the tool of violence. So the question, when people ask me oftentimes, well, gee, I don't know when. 99% of the times when I dig, they're thinking about a situation that doesn't warrant the response of violence. One of the analogies I give to people all the time is, you're at the wedding and you've got the really drunk, annoying wedding guest who's just being obnoxious as hell, spilling drinks on everybody, being really rude, really crass, and people are just getting sick of it. And the dude, he's in great shape, and you're just getting more and more agitated by this guy, to the point to where you can't take it anymore. You get up and you go, hey, I took that class with Larkin. What did he he showed me the solar plexus. Solar plexus isn't paddle. Strike him to the solar plexus, he'll just lose his air, and that'll just shut him up. So you go up, you duck through, you hit the guy right in the solar plexus. Everybody's happy. All of a sudden, the loudmouth is shut up. He's holding his stomach, and people are cheering for you. They're saying, thank God somebody finally did something, and you're great. You feel great about it. And then you look over at him, and all of a sudden now he's clutching his chest. He's starting to turn purple, and he has a arrhythmia because you had no idea that he had a genetically bad heart, and he drops dead. Over what? Over the fact that he was an obnoxious wedding guest. And now we're dealing with a situation where, you got somebody who at a minimum is going to be facing manslaughter on something like that over a totally avoidable situation that they chose to take action on. So a lot of the times when people ask me the question that you just asked me, it's they know inherently they want to use violence when it's not really warranted, when they can maybe get away with it, and that's when the key thing for me is, I want to just shut this guy up, but I don't want to kill him. When people tell me that, I don't want to kill him, I crack up because I'm like, I collect articles of two guys that get into arguments. One guy pushes another guy, brains himself, and he's dead. So we don't understand how fragile the human body is. And so when you're going to cross that physical plane and put hands on somebody, you better have a clear understanding of when that would ever be appropriate. And that's really what it comes down to. It's the choice. And the more you put yourself in an asocial training environment, the more it becomes second nature. That's the one thing that my clients that unfortunately have had to use the information have always come back to me and said, they said, I recognize asocial. All of a sudden I recognize that, oh shit, there's no communication going. This guy's coming in, he's closing distance. And they inherently recognize it. And these are people from, I've trained, elite military operators, but I've also trained a lot of soccer moms and a lot of just regular civilians. And we all are inherently really good at this. That's the other thing that's really uncomfortable for people is it's not the fact that the material is beyond them. Once you start learning how to naturally hurt the human body, injure the human body, you realize you're already kind of pre-wired for it. We're the descendants of people who were extremely successful using the tool of violence. And, we're built as predators. Our eyes are in the front. We hunt in packs. We know how to use tools, and we're very adept at being able to figure out how to injure and put something down and make it non-functional. What you want to do as a citizen is you want to be able to harness that in that rare black swan event when you'd ever need that. And that's when if you train correctly, you'll be ready for that, and you won't get yourself in any trouble on the on the other side of things, the antisocial aggression side. People ask me all the time. They go, "Hey, does your training work really well in a bar fight?" I go, "Yeah, it works great. Works fantastic in a bar fight." But that's really a huge risk for anybody to take. If you want to use violence to control communication, that's a really, really dicey way to go through life, and a pretty good chance that you're either going to end up really injured or you're going to end up in jail.
Yeah, I like it. So, Andy, I know that you had a couple of questions. I want to, Andy, if you don't mind, turning it back over to me when you get done with your question. And I have a couple of questions for Tim also that are kind of intriguing in my little squirrel brain that's going on. So, Andy, what do you got?
Sure. I have a whole note list of stuff that I've just been writing down as I've been talking to him. So first of all, we're talking about your book. And for me, as a quick review, I've listened to your book on Audible 3 times. I was joking with Jeremy because I had it on like 1.55 speed, which is pretty fast today, just so I could try to get through the whole book again so I could remember everything. And for me, I think, and this is a question Jeremy's going to ask you later, but it's for me, I'm going to answer it for myself. Who's this book for? And for me, it's for absolutely everybody, especially those that are instructors and somebody who wants to teach violence is the answer, AKA, instructors, anybody in self-defense. I think this is a very, very valuable book. I'd like to add the other people because very often Jeremy and I are in like local Facebook groups, metro crime groups and stuff. And tons of times we're seeing people, well, I would have shot this guy for breaking into my car, or, I would have kicked his butt because he did this. And Jeremy and I are often always on there like, hey, guys, you got to really think about what you're doing. And secretly through this book that you have, you dispel tons of myths. You talk about ego. You talk about how you cannot allow ego to get the best of you, because when we're talking about violence, this is no longer a high school fight after school. This is something for your life. And so I find that really important. So one of the questions that I have for you, because intrigues me for females because I have a lot of females in my family. I'm one of just a couple males in the family left. How do you feel about females in training and how they can get proper training, that they're not getting this false sense of security where they go into this certain class, and I'm not going to name them, where they go in with a bunch of other women and fight against men that are in padded suits, and they think that this is the way that's going to save their life? How do you treat that? How do you teach them to make sure that they get the proper training that's actually going to be beneficial for them?
It's been a pet peeve of mine from day one because after I blew my ears in the military, I stayed in the special operations community, and I was a special warfare intelligence officer, and I worked with everybody. It's when we turned purple, and I got to work with everybody in a lot of the agencies, and I worked with a couple of units that had female operators, and you quickly see how great female operators are, well-trained female operator, and not because they can compete with the men per se. That's not the idea. They have skill sets that we can't do. Like, they can get into places that you and I could never get into. They can use their social skills to get in. They're really, really good operators. The thing you have to understand is that you don't ever want to teach a woman to compete. You want to teach destruction, skill sets of destruction, because destruction works on everybody. It doesn't care if you're XX or XY chromosome. It doesn't matter. The thumb going into the eye, the fist going into the throat. It doesn't matter if it's a male or female. If it's correctly done, it'll get a huge result. So women, I've found to be extremely good if you train them correctly. And what I mean by that is you train them exactly the way you train men. I don't train them any differently than I train men. The only difference is women, when they train with us, they never train against another woman. They only train against male body types. So I did a class a while back for a female entrepreneur group, and they were great. And I wanted them to have, trainers. I wanted them to train with men. They kind of didn't want to bring like their spouses and boyfriends. And I don't encourage that either, because that's not always good. But what I did was I went to the local metro here and then the fire department. And I got a bunch of guys from the fire department and metro. I go, listen, you get a free class. All you got to do is you got to train with the women. So the women loved it. It was great. They felt safe because the guys were all, obviously police officers or firemen. And that's debatable. I'm married to a cop, so that's debatable whether or not they should have felt safe. But but they had a great time. But what was great about it was these women got to train against all these unfamiliar male body types. And they got to see that, my biggest thing with women is, and it's the biggest secret that's out there, is alpha predators are different than us. I'm 6'1", I'm 240. I've stayed in pretty good shape. I'm in my 50s now. Still have that presence, still have that look. I laugh when people sit there and tell me, oh, you're a big guy or you're this. I go, yeah. It works on everybody I don't care about. If you're intimidated by somebody's physical presence, then that you're not my threat. You're not the person I'm worried about, because the people that I train people for, they look at everything. They don't see differences. They see similarities in every human body. They'll sit there and say, oh, there's the throat, there's the TMJ, there's the side of the neck, there's, he has a knee like me, he has elbows like me. They look at all the vulnerable areas, and that's how they do it. And in doing all the interviews that I did in the prisons with the prison, corrections officers, and learning about all the intricacies of the prison gangs and how they use violence as currency, was probably one of the most enlightening things I ever learned, because they can't afford to get it wrong. And the way they look at violence is very straightforward. It's not to glorify them in any way, shape, or form, or say they're great organizations, but it's this petri dish that they live in of asocial violence. And how do people operate in that area? How do they use a tool of violence? And these guys are very methodical, and at the highest levels, and how they use violence. And you can learn a heck of a lot from that. And women are really beneficiaries of that, because when they're given that ability to bypass competing with bigger, faster, and stronger and just go straight to injury, they understand, I don't want to give this guy a chance to show me what he can do, because I can't compete with the bigger, faster, stronger part, but I can get right into that throat right now, because he's stupid enough. What I want to do with my clients is, I want the predator to make the mistake to where he pulls them in close to him from an intimidation standpoint, or just, getting them there and not realizing He's just pulled them into their bear trap. And I want them to then spring on it, and they know exactly what to do. They only need that one area of the human body to start the process. And women are extremely good when it comes to that. We've got 2 female instructors right now, and I've trained probably in excess of about 4,000 women in the last 5 years or so. And just amazing. I mean, I have nothing but good things to say. And it's not about see, everybody looks at it like, if we put her in the ring, say we put this small girl in the ring, like I talk about a girl in my book. She was like 120 pounds. She was a 240-pound rapist, got on top of her in her dorm room. If we took those 2 and we put them in our octagon and we said, go, we know how that would have turned out. But she had enough knowledge of injury, how to put injury in the human body, that when this guy pulled himself close to her, she knew how to exploit that, and she knew how to save her own life. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about giving people skill sets that's available to the whole human race. If you can think and move, you can learn injury to the human body. And it's your best chance to survive a violent situation if you know how to use injury.
Yeah. So Tim, that's a great thing. And I just have one more comment about that stuff, and then I'll turn it over to Judson. And that's the key to me about this book is something else. And you just briefly touched on it, but something else you mentioned. It's not about being a woman or a man or being extremely big and muscular or really small. If you have this basic knowledge of everybody has the same weak points and you learn how to use those weak points to your advantage, that's how you develop that mindset to be able to save your life when you need to most. And that's what I got out of that book a lot. So I think that was amazing. I could sit here and do this whole podcast by myself just because your book, but I got to turn it over to Judson because, unfortunately I have to share sometimes.
Yeah, well, sometimes we share more than we should, right? So, Tim, my question and actually you answered 2 of my other questions in your previous comments, so I won't go with that one. But the one that I really wanted to ask you that hasn't been answered yet is who exactly is you keep using the word client. And I love that word because I don't have customers. I don't have students. I have clients. I have associates. I have, people that want to learn that come to my classes. So who exactly, if you can paint a picture, paint the person that needs to come to your class and paint the person that wants to come to your class.
That it's funny. I've been across all demographics. I don't have a customer avatar that is really useful to me. And what do I mean by that? I'll give 2 examples. One, I've got a former CEO of a Fortune 100 company who was flying in from Italy, just train with us on a regular basis. And one of his best friends in the training environment was a truck driver. He hauled big loads all across the U.S. and everything. 2 guys that never would have met, 2 guys from vastly different backgrounds. But as I tell everybody, violence cuts across all spectrums. It's just amazing, and I have to be very careful because people want to politicize everything every day. And what I try to tell people across the board is everybody gets affected by violence. It doesn't matter what your political persuasion is, doesn't matter what your sexual orientation is, doesn't matter what your religious background is. Just about everybody has a potentiality to have violence happen in their life. Therefore, it needs to be open. Another thing that really struck me, the bonding aspect of learning violence, and it's going to sound pretty extreme to some people, but it was wild. I had a transgender client show up, and when I say transgender client, it looked like my grandfather with a wig. It wasn't. She was just, it was very obviously very masculine looking. So dealing with a lot of stuff. Ended up training with a Christian missionary that was coming. You know what they bonded on? The fact that they were both going back to places where everybody hated them, and they're going to be persecuted for their lifestyle. He was going to an African country where they didn't want Christianity, they didn't want him, and he knew there's a great potentiality for violence. She was going back into an environment where they didn't want her. She was from the middle of the country. It wasn't, very tolerant for the gay community.
Wow.
And it was weird. So you see people do this, and I don't say this like airy-fairy thing. It's what I'm trying to tell you is you see some amazing things when people are really concerned about violence. It's amazing what drops away and what becomes important and what people actually bond on, and it's really cool. So I know that doesn't really answer your question. I would say the person that I really am trying to reach these days, and it might be because I'm seeing myself, but I'm finding that usually males and females over 30, usually they're entrepreneurial, they have their own businesses, or they're in the military and law enforcement. A lot of operators that come through too. But they have families. It's something about having a family that all of a sudden people start to realize, well, shit, I'm not 20 anymore. I maybe have lost a step from their old days, and they're concerned. They realize, like, I really don't know what happened. Something happened in their life, either to somebody they love, somebody they care about, that usually predicates them coming to train with me. And something scared them. And they realized they had nothing in the toolbox to deal with that situation if it got worse or if they were involved in it.
Yeah.
And that's what I can do. What I really found, and the reason I love this stuff still after 30 years of doing it, my favorite class to train is my basic 2-day class, where I get all new people, anywhere from 40 to 60 people that come in. And I know at the end of 2 days, I'm going to have them all understanding violence and how to navigate life. And I'm hoping that I'm sending them back out and there's going to be huge behavioral changes in the decisions they make. So it minimizes the chance of violence ever coming into their life. That's the real goal that I have for people. Teaching people up to like the level of instructor and doing all the really crazy training that we can do and the fun stuff and all the athletic ends of it, that portion of it, I like it. It's fun. It's just not as interesting to me because the biggest impact happens when I can change somebody's perception of what they think they need to respond to and what they absolutely have to respond to. And if I can get that to somebody, everything else is easy after that. Gotcha.
So my the other side of that question that I wanted to ask you is, can you give us like your 2019 closing schedule? When and where are you teaching over the next couple of months for our listeners? So if they want to reach out to you, they can find you.
Yeah, if they just go to targetfocustraining.com, that's my website, just targetfocustraining.com, or search Tim Larkin. I'll come up. That'll put my schedule up. We've got 2 more classes scheduled this year. Well, September is sold out, so we still have some slots for the November class.
And where is that come up?
They're all be in Las Vegas.
Okay.
My training center in Las Vegas. I do train other places. I train in New York. I train in Miami. I train in Hawaii. Lots of different places. LA. I try to be bigger cities. Toronto I've trained in. Vancouver I've trained in. I used to train in London until they kicked me out. Hopefully I'll get back there. Yeah, I know.
So Jeremy, I'm going to kick it back over to you. I'm sure that you're chomping at the bit to get some more questions or intel out of Tim.
I had a question, but how'd you get kicked out of London?
2011. So I had a 25-year history of training in London. I trained all the special operations groups over there, our special operations groups. I went to school there. I went to the London School of Economics for a year. Never had anything other than a parking ticket. In 2011, they had the riots in London, and I've done a lot of press over there. So I did a quick interview with the BBC. Everybody reported, all the papers reported the interview as it was. The last question the guy asked me was, "Hey, we know that you have a lot of clients over here. We know you come over here a couple times a year to train and put on seminars. Are you planning on visiting any of the riot affected areas when you get over here?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I have clients in Birmingham. I've got a couple of clients in Tottenham, which is outside of London, where things happened. And yeah, I plan on visiting, them." And they wanted to kind of show me the scenarios. And basically what they wanted to show me was the fact that, "Hey, Tim, here's where I was. This is when I recognized asocial, and thank you, because I was able to get myself and my family out of here during that time." That was both scenarios that my clients were going to talk to me about. So everybody reports it straight except the Mirror. The Mirror is kind of like their National Enquirer. And the Mirror said on page 3, "Larkin to lead riot tour." And basically they said that I was going to go around and incite vigilantism and rabble rouse and get everybody to go after. Yeah, it was there. It was a knee-jerk reaction because they were really scared about that. Basically, what I said in the interview, which they didn't like, was the fact that Britain used to have, the UK had fantastic self-defense laws until the 50s. Well-meaning reasons why they changed those laws, but they had no idea the repercussions that were going to happen. So basically, I can give you numerous examples, but basically you as a citizen over there, it's really dicey for you to take action to protect yourself from a legal standpoint. And so I was just saying, this is the perfect opportunity for the UK to really review some of its self-defense laws, because these citizens that, the Metropolitan Police said we can't be first responders anymore. So I placed that in. So that year in 2011, I'm inducted in the Black Belt Hall of Fame. I'm self-defense instructor of the year. I'm being awarded over in England. I'm flying to England to do a big, huge martial arts conference. It's me, Randy Couture, a bunch of other guys. We're all going to speak. I'm the keynote. And they're going to give me this big award. And I go to the airport and I put my stuff in, and I'm like, I give my passport and everything. And I'm looking. I knew something was up. And this woman's like, and here in Vegas, the London flight, it's Virgin. The London flight, it's packed every day. It's a 4:00 flight. I mean, everybody's up against the thing. All of a sudden I hear from behind, Mr. Larkin. And I look around, this guy's in a 3-piece suit. All he needed was a bowler hat and the umbrella. And he looked like a perfect British civil servant. He goes, I'm from the UK Border Department. I've flown over here to present you this letter. This is signed by Home Secretary Theresa May. You are banned from this flight. You're not allowed to enter the UK, and there's no recourse.
Wow.
And that you will not be getting on this flight. Guys, it was like the party in the Red Sea. All of a sudden, just everybody just, goes out, and it's like I'm this Irish terrorist, that's coming. But yeah, they banned me for that because they said that the UK used that article. There's back history there. I did an interview years before, with 2 MPs, and I was in this one MP's district that's like a minister of parliament, like a congressperson here, and she had a lot of knife crime. She just did. And what she didn't like was I did a really big radio show that's really popular over there, and they had a round circle, and basically I was brought on as the crazy American, kill them all, let God sort them out. And then at the end, everybody basically agreed with my premise, saying that was really sane and sober. Everybody except the MP, because it was her district. So I go into the next room after the interview, and I go into the green room, and she's sitting there with another woman who was an MP also. I didn't know, and I introduced myself and just said, thank you very much, and went out. Well, the other MP that was sitting with her was her really good friend, Theresa May, who ends up becoming the Home Secretary a couple of years later, and then the Prime Minister. And so that's why it's taken so long for me to because as long as Theresa May was in power, it's not like here in the US, you're very limited in how you can go after these things, these travel bans. But now that she's out of power, I have a good chance of getting back over there.
That's great. So Jeremy asked you about London. I got to ask about Hawaii, because, Hawaii's generally in, pretty anti-gun state. So what's your thoughts, and how do you train over there? Is it just basically all hand-to-hand style self-defense?
No, I thought that too until I started spending time. So one of my really good buddies is one of my instructors. He lives in Hilo. On the Big Island, man, you talk about those boys all have guns. I mean, that's a huge hunting area, real familiarization with firearms, very comfortable with that. I work with a lot of law enforcement over there. They deal with a lot of, really, a lot of meth comes through there. There's a lot of really bad actors that come through Hawaii. So it was really interesting, working with the law enforcement side and then working with the locals who are very comfortable, from a hunting standpoint or anything else. So there's more of that. Now you go on to Honolulu, you're absolutely right. You go there, it's, guns are it's very, anti-gun and gun-free zones. But the people over there are fantastic. I mean, my instructor over there is amazing. And then his people, he's got some guys that are getting ready to test for instructor, and they're just outstanding. So I get to use them. I do a big event with Tony Robbins every year out in Maui. And we do it for his platinum group, which is kind of like his elite group that we do it. And I use all my Hawaiian instructors. They all come over from the Big Island, and we do it on Maui. And they're just phenomenal. But the Hawaiian culture is fantastic. I mean, those guys are very comfortable with hand to hand, very comfortable with putting hands on people. And, it's been a real pleasure to work with a lot of them over there.
That's awesome. I want to circle back, and you had mentioned antisocial aggression and asocial violence. I want to dive into that a little bit deeper, because I think it's easy for folks, especially like concealed carrier types, to kind of approach any violence with the same mindset. Can you talk a little bit more about antisocial aggression, asocial violence, the big difference between the two, and of those two different types of violence, when is there an out, right? Is there an out in antisocial aggression? Is there an out for an innocent participant or a victim in those circumstances in asocial violence?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to antisocial aggression, that by its definition involves choice, and the choice is, I tell a story in the book about I picked my son up. I picked my son up from his mom's house when he was a little boy. He's 24 now, but he was about 8 years old at the time. And I was taking him down to go hang out with my brother in San Diego while I taught that day. And then we were all going out that night. And so I picked him up and I threw a magazine on his lap when he got in the car, and he's holding the magazine. And we drive out. Nobody's on the road, nothing. I go to drive out, I take a left turn on. This guy comes flying down the hill, swerves, just misses me, and flips me the bird on the way down. So I let it go. I drive down. Sure enough, it's stoplight. I pull up right next to him because there's really no option there, and he just starts going off on me. He goes, "Oh, look at you! You got that tattoo. You think that makes you tough?" And he's just baiting me, nonstop. And my son's like, "Wait!" And you see, it's my 8-year-old son right there, because he's saying it through the passenger side, So you can see I have a kid. So I'm just like, "Hey, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Wasn't paying attention. Hope you have a great day." I'm using all my de-escalation. And I could tell the guy just had he was looking for a reason, and I just didn't want to be the reason. So he drives off, and my son's like, "Dad, you could have kicked that guy's ass. You could have got out and done this, done this, done this." And I said, "Maybe." I said, "Connor," I said, "I probably could have, been successful." I said, "But I don't know. I don't know if he has a gun. I don't know, what his mindset is." And I said, "What if I was successful? And then we had to wait for the police. And what if they determined that, I shouldn't have hit him? Then where does that leave you, and over this?" And so we went through the whole scenario. And then he throws the magazine in my face. He goes, "But you're this guy," because I was on the cover of Black Belt magazine that month. And he just couldn't understand in his little 8-year-old brain why I wouldn't just get out and, high karate him or something. But it was tough. That was really tough for me, because nobody likes to have that happen in front of their kid and put your kid in danger or anything like that. But again, you have to think these things out. And believe me, every part of my ego wanted to tear that guy apart. But I'd been in enough scenarios and enough situations where I realized that was just going to be, even if I got away with it, even if I successfully used violence and I wasn't prosecuted and it was justified and all that other stuff, my son still would have to have seen that. And I didn't need that in my life. What I try to tell people about these situations they get so amped up about, and their ego gets so bruised, they think they have to respond or do the stuff, I always ask them to apply the 3-day test. And the 3-day test that I talk about is whatever event you're talking about, 3 days from now, if you find yourself sitting in a jail cell or 6 feet under, would you tell yourself at that point, "Yep, there was nothing else I could have done. I would have done exactly the same thing again"? Very, very, very few things meet that threshold. And it's a really easy way to navigate your life that way. And it just requires a lot of self-discipline and restraint. And it requires a lot of prior thought. Like your people, I'm sure you guys have thought about it. You guys have seen it a lot. A lot of people get their concealed carry and then they think, "Oh, I'm done. Good, great. I don't have to do anything." They don't really train. They don't continue to train. They don't even know how long it really takes them to deploy their weapon from whatever type of concealment they have. I have this great clip that I show of Dennis Tuller, from the tool or drill. And he's talking about when we put it together, he said, yeah, there's nothing special about, 21 feet. He said, we were just shooting 7 yards and we were just wondering if a guy could run a guy down. We were all surprised that, yeah, he was able to stab the guy a couple times before the guy could, deploy his weapon. He said, but this is the most interesting part to me was, he goes, but 21 feet means nothing. He said, depending on the way you carry your deep concealment, he goes, we found upwards of 65, 75 feet people could have before you could deploy your weapon. So he said, you really have to understand, how to use the tool. And that's my biggest thing. Any type of training you have whatsoever, if you don't master the basics and you don't understand certain things, those tools can actually be, detrimental to you. You could be spending time trying to dig out your tool when the person's right here, and you could affect an injury on them and then deploy your tool if you needed it after. But if you only have one tool in your mind, then you're really limited. And that's what I try to give my people options. I try them to make sure that you get your brain is your weapon system is your brain, your tools, your ancillary tools, your first set of tools is your body, and everything else is ancillary after that. And if you operate that way and you are consistent with your targeting, the way we teach targeting and injury to the human body, it applies no matter what the tool is that you're using. So it's just a really easy way to kind of look at it and make a real holistic view of it. Did that answer your question?
No, I really like it. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah, that part of the book too. When we instruct, I tell a lot of stories, and that's one thing I loved about your book the most. Is a lot of stories that you can either relate to, or it really opens your eyes as far as self-defense. And another one you just hit on that just brought me back to your book was the police officer story. And of course, we don't want to tell all the stories here because then no one will read the book, right? But you talk about this police officer, and there was kind of a theft involved, and he sees a guy coming. He sees it happening. He has good as situational awareness, etc. He tells him to stop. The guy pulls a knife. He grabs the arm, gets the knife out of the fight, and then the guy reaches in and gets a revolver and shoots him. And then the story goes from there. So that was an eye opener for me to kind of think about that and say, man, you think about, you're going to watch for this hand, and you see a knife, and then you're going to go fight for that knife, and then next you're getting stabbed or shot by another hand. That was kind of intriguing to me, and it really taught me something to take a step further than just the simple look for the hand kind of thing. Look for more than just that. And going back to Jeremy, and I'll turn it over to him again, is the antisocial ego people are who we commonly see each and every day. We had a story here in New Mexico. Two guys fighting over a lane on the freeway, and one guy shot at the truck and killed a 2-year-old little girl in the back seat. And I love the thought that you said this 3-day test. That's something that I haven't heard, and I'm gonna steal that, and I'm gonna keep that for myself. And thinking, in 3 days, if you're sitting in jail, was it worth it? And I think that's a good point to make somebody really think about your ego. And somebody cutting you off on the freeway in 3 days, is it worth it? Man, heck, in 5 minutes, they've probably already forgot at the point where they've already flipped somebody off. So I really like that.
Andy, that is absolutely huge in our world. I mean, that what you're talking about there is unbelievably important. And that is just a testament to what Tim is trying to teach people is what happens next. What's the next step? What's going to happen after this? What's going to happen in 2-3 days? That's why I always apply the 72-hour rule to any mass shooting. I'm not going to look at anything or respond to anything for 72 hours because nobody knows shit at that point.
Right.
So, Jeremy, back to you.
I want to kind of selfishly have a question or more of a statement. And I kind of want to get your opinion on it. We often see, a vast majority of times, anytime there's a mass shooting, people are looking for the why, right? Or who was he? Was he a right-wing extremist? Was he a left-wing extremist? Was it religious? This, that, or the other? And one of the things that I typically comment on is it really doesn't matter what his or her reason was. What matters is what's the goal and how are they going to accomplish that goal? And for oftentimes it's they want to inflict as much trauma and terror as possible. So if we look at that, that'll do us much more good than looking for reasons and trying to identify folks, because there's going to be somebody on either side of the political spectrum that wants to do these types of things. So what are some of your thoughts on that, and what would you suggest folks do when they're going their day-to-day lives and they have this anxiety or this fear or a reasonable concern now, right? Because I mean, these shootings seem to be more prevalent. When they're looking at like an asocial violence type encounter, what can somebody do to prepare themselves for that mentally and physically with the tools and training?
It's tough. We had Route 51 happen out here in Vegas. We had the big shooting, or Route 91, the big shooting here at Mandalay, and my wife was the on-scene commander for that, when she took over. So, I had 3 friends shot in that. I had my friend's daughter was shot, all survived. My wife lost one of her officers, got shot. But that was one of those things where I think the thing that got everybody was the fact there was no answer. There was no political agenda. There was nothing anybody could pin anything to, because this guy was off the grid, basically. He was an older guy. He didn't have any social media accounts, and there's just a bunch of stuff. Why I thought that was so interesting was because people are always grasping for stuff. And this is where I think we get it wrong as a society. We're trying to figure out, if we could just get in this guy's mind and we could figure out we can prevent the next one because of this guy. And I understand the thought process behind it, but I don't think people really understand why people do acts of violence. And that oftentimes people, and I mean, it sounds like a cop-out, but it really isn't. There are just some evil people out there. There are plenty of people that have been exposed to all the same stresses that the shooter's been exposed to, all the same challenges. But this person went and took a left turn and decided to use violence, and do a mass shooting. They're a rare individual. And I think the problem is we do stuff like, we try to bring politics into it. We try to bring things in, and violence has nothing to do with that. Violence is violence. It's very direct. And once you cross that physical plane of violence, the answer should be by all of society is no, that's wrong. And we're not going to condone it, and we're not going to glorify it, and we're not going to coddle it either. And there's some really hard choices that have to be made. I think, I tell people all the time, and this is a really hard thing for people to understand, but if you want to start protecting your brain from stuff like this, whenever you see an act of violence, you have to do something that's a little uncomfortable for us as humans. And that is, we want to look at violence from the successful use of the tool. What can we learn at that point? Meaning, who was successful in this violent encounter that I just saw? Who was successful? Why were they successful? It's not condoning the act, but what you're doing is you're learning there is nothing for you from a self-protection aspect. There is no good information to be had from the victim's side of the story. You want to see who the successful people were using the tool of violence. And then you want to ask yourself, the alpha predator question after that, it's how could you have done it better? And where do I get this from? They did a study a while back with a bunch of prisoners from prison gangs, really violent guys. They showed them a bunch of different scenarios. None of these guys, all violent scenarios, none of them saw themselves from the victim's standpoint. They never said, well, I would have been able to block it and do this. They all saw themselves from the successful use side of the equation. And on top of that, the real alphas said, yeah, but I would have even done this. I would have done it this way. They would have improved upon it. Now, why were they doing that? Okay, you can say they're criminal. Yes, but they're also living in an environment where they can't afford to think of anything other than success. And the tool of violence is their currency. And so they have to protect their minds and how they look at it. They can't give themselves any sort of thought process that would put them 2 steps behind the aggressor. They want to be, one-on-one with the aggressor. And the way to do that is to protect your mind and how you look at the tool and how you use the tool of violence. That is far more useful to us as a society been trying to figure out, these warped individuals that have, there's all sorts of things we can look at. We can look at the opioid crisis. We can look at all sorts of, mental health issues. We can do all of that, and all that's very valid. But that's not going to necessarily do anything other than make us feel like we're doing something by learning that this guy had a bad childhood or he was screwed up or something. And so we can say, oh, okay, yeah, this is a one-off. We're not going to have to worry about this anymore. And that's not the case. If somebody has the will to do violence, they do it. They'll use a truck. There's a famous story I show in China where a guy stabbed 53 people, with a knife, just ran out into a crowd and just started stabbing people and killing them. People do crazy things when they want to. And the problem is we try to outlaw tools. That's what got me in trouble in the UK. Literally, if you went to go buy butter knives in the UK, they have a warning label on them, basically saying, don't misuse this cutlery. And it's crazy. You and I we'd sit there and laugh at it, but that's essentially what we're trying to do is we have to understand that there are just some people out there that are off. They're going to do things that are incredibly violent, and we need to minimize the chance. We've got to make sure that we really educate ourselves on how to deal with situations like that. I do a big thing on active shooter, and I take people through an active shooter scenario, basically to teach them, the ideas behind it. Most people, when they do active shooter training that I've seen, all they do is they scare the crap out of people. They don't really teach of what makes it more efficient for the shooter, where are your opportunities, how do you train in a calm environment. And I draw that back to my military training. Anytime I was training weapons, explosives, or anything, I had the calmest instructors. These guys who, like, if you're looking like SEAL training, the same guys that in phase one of the training were absolute psychotics and just dogging us and doing everything. When they became our weapons instructors in the next phase, because back then second phase was weapons, these same psychos that were crazy were cool, calm, and directed. Anytime anything was lethal, they wanted to make sure you got it installed the right way. And that's what I try to do with all my clients is I try to install really calm, deliberate information that's going to be there for them when they need it the most. And that's the most important thing for people to understand. Trying to figure out the bad guy, it puts you way behind the power curve. If we try to figure out, okay, what's his mental state? What's this? What's that? I get it. I get why people want to do that. But for us, meaning for us, the general public, it doesn't really make us any safer knowing any of those things about the person. I mean, it will help psychologists. It will help people kind of do, after action reports, but it really won't help us as a society to be able to prevent these things on a mass scale, because we've tried this before and we just, we're very unsuccessful.
We had a Ryan Kleckner on our podcast, and he has a really good app that he created, Mayday app, which is really good. You might want to look at, Tim. But, one thing he said, and it's been months ago that Ryan was on our show and we talked about mass shootings, and Ryan says the same thing. He goes, let me hit you with some truth. What are the chances of another mass shooting happen? 100%. That was months ago. How many have we had? Guaranteed. Yeah. What are our chances of having another mass shooting? Still 100%. And so I think you and Jeremy both bring this point very good. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter their political stance or religious stance, anything like that. Evil's evil. And we can't control what they do. But what we can do is we can control what we do. We can get our training. We can take lessons from Tim. We can go as far as we can go to get training for medical training, all these other things that we can do with personal responsibility. And for me, that's what it's about.
Great. Yeah. I guess probably the only thing I'd add to what I just said was, the cool part about learning all this stuff, believe it or not, is the more peaceful life you'll live. Like the people that I know that are really well trained and when it comes to lethal application of violence are the calmest individuals. They're the first ones to open the door for you, the first ones to help you out. They don't live a paranoid lifestyle. It's because they've looked at the subject, they understand what to do, they've trained, and they've also told themselves that, hey, until I need this, I'm going to really enjoy life. and I'm gonna live life to the fullest. And so that's really what I want to do, is because what's really interesting, especially with women, is, you know, they've got this idea, the potentiality for violence. And that to me is probably the scariest thing for them, is when they know that there's a chance for violence and they also know they have zero training to deal with it. And when you can give people like the skill sets to kind of navigate those waters and make better decisions in their lives, it's amazing to see the behavioral changes that they do, and then how much better they feel about their life after that. So I teach very extreme stuff, you know, and the press loves to get into that, the fact that we show people how to take the human body apart when necessary. But they miss the aspect of the fact that my best responses that I get from people are when they tell me, hey, Tim, prior to reading your book or prior to going to your training, I used to do X, and now I don't do that anymore. And I've really minimized the chance of violence. I realized how lucky I was that I was really, I was basically sleeping with my head in the railroad track. And, just because the train didn't come last night, I didn't realize that the train could come. Therefore, I took my head off the railroad track. And that's really what I try to do with most people, is like, how many things in your life are you willingly put your head on the railroad track and just, thanking God that, train didn't come last night, so everything must be okay. And what are those incidences? People going to the ATM like late at night. I show this one video of this older couple that goes to the ATM. And I've shown this to tons of self-defense experts and everybody, right? Everybody does the same thing. They go, okay, well, when the woman went up and she was doing it, the husband, who was limping, by the way, because he's got a bad leg and he's overweight, they're just saying, oh, well, he should have turned and faced the area, and they would have seen the three guys coming, quicker and everything. And I'm like, yeah, okay, great. Yep. Situational awareness, all this other stuff. And then I finally have to wait till the very end when nobody said anything. I go, hey, does anybody look at the time code? And they look at time code. Well, time code says 22:30. And it's like, yeah, 10:30 at night. How many times do you think they've got away going here at 10:30 at night? They look pretty damn comfortable. This is not their first time going to this ATM at that night. But, what was so important, they couldn't get up 15 minutes earlier the next day, when, your chances of getting attacked at an ATM during the day are, statistically far, far lower than anything after 8:30 at night. And it's those kind of things that I want people to make better decisions on. I want them to realize this is what it takes. If you ignore all this stuff, then the only tool that's going to get you out of it is violence. And this is what you have to do to somebody to survive this. And normally, when people go through that type of an experience, they start asking themselves, they start saying, okay, what am I doing? Okay, I'm not going to take that route anymore. I'm not going to drive through here anymore. I'm not going to, I'm not going to go to that bar anymore. It's amazing. I mean, I get incredible feedback that way. I mean, it's interesting when I get to hear people when they unfortunately have to use the physical portion of the training and do that. And that's interesting. But for me, the more rewarding is the people that decided, they read the information, they understood the information, and then they said, you know what, I'm not going to keep doing what I used to do. I'm going to minimize this chance of violence coming into my life. And I really think that's the greatest gift you can give anybody. I've got twin daughters that are 6 years old. And I look at them, I've got two boys and now I've got my two girls. And I look at my girls, and that's the gift I want to give them. I don't want them to be paranoid. I don't want them to feel like they have to be, crazy, training all the time. They'll be very well trained, but I want them to be able to live life. And I want to give them the skill sets to make, good decisions. And that's really the best thing I can do for any client, including my own family. And that's really what I think most of your clients would get if they read the book or checked out some of the materials. It would probably help them, in their decisions, their daily decisions on violence or the potentiality for violence.
I love it. I tell people, hey, if you're not willing to die for something, don't put yourself in a position that you might have to kill for it. But I think the one of the things that's lacking from that is, what else are you doing in your day-to-day lives where you're putting yourself at an increased risk for being attacked? And if you don't have to do it, don't do it. Stop doing it. Before we let you go, Andy he has an event coming up in September, and he wants to know if he can get a verbal commitment from you. Are you going to storm Area 51? Is that something on your calendar?
I am not going to storm Area 51. I got a lot of buddies that work out there. And they said, yeah, 300,000 people are supposed to storm there. And my buddy's response was, he goes, well, He goes, there's going to be a mass disappearance, I guess. He goes, I guess they'll finally find out the real aliens will take them all up.
Right.
No, but they're joking. But yeah, they're actually, quite honestly, people are worried about that.
Yeah.
They're worried about the whole thing. I don't think it's a, I think it'll be handled, well, but I think there are some people that have some legitimate concerns that are going out there. I think there are a lot of people out there that don't understand what they're getting themselves into. Yeah. And they could do some real stupid things out there, which I would strongly suggest you don't do. I'll tell you one story that I have. So when I was in the Navy, I was hanging out at Fallon, and the guys were doing some bombing runs and stuff. And we had this arrogant group of Navy fighters that came in, and they were practicing bombing, and a 14 pilot, he decided that he was just going to go off and take a look. So he decided to fly into into Area 51 space that he damn well knew he wasn't supposed to be in, but he figured he was going to do it and just teach the Air Force, what to do, right? And when I say this guy was like, he was like Iceman out of Top Gun. He was that super confident, cocky guy, right? Air Force brought his ass down. They took the F-14. They owned it for 2 years. They didn't give it back to the Navy for 2 years. This guy comes out 3 weeks later. He wouldn't talk to anybody. He wouldn't say anything. He was white as a ghost, scared shitless over what he did. They just, and it was, he kind of ruined his career. He was able to do it, but to see such a change in somebody after that, it was really interesting. When it comes to that. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on out there. Here in Vegas, you see it all the time. There's a parking lot where they all park and then they fly them out and they go out, and there's a lot of interesting work that goes on out there. It'll be interesting to see that many people show up, and it's not like a music event or anything,
Well, they said they're planning the music. Now there's a music fest or whatever that they're kind of planning for that same weekend. And I don't think very many people are going to show up, right? I think it's a social media prank. I think you'll have a few folks try to get it. But.
Yeah, I just hope some of the knuckleheads really don't understand. I hope they understand how serious it is. They try to breach any of those defenses, and it's not. I would not recommend it at all.
I saw something on the news, even just going beyond the stupidity of trying to storm 51. A lot of these communities are pretty concerned about it because, back when anytime they've had anybody out there, they had the whole ranch debacle. People went out there. There was no gas. There was no food. There was no water. There was no means of living. So even if just take the Area 51 out of it completely and just go out there to the desert in the middle of nowhere with limited resources, you've already put yourself at huge risk. And, maybe Iceman there that got flew into Area 51, maybe they actually showed him what he wanted to see, and maybe he regrets it.
Yeah, he was a change. They threw everything at that guy, man. He was locked down to where he wouldn't even admit that he did it, to that point. It was pretty funny. The Navy was totally pissed off. They lost their F-14 too. And, I got to give it to the Air Force, man. I would have done the same exact thing, to a smart ass that did that. But, that's a perfect example. I know we're joking a little bit, but that's a perfect example. Like, I had a client call me up, and he was all charged up. He was going to go to a huge rally in Washington, D.C. And this guy's 71 years old. His wife's like 70. I think she's 70 or 72. They're older couple. They're in good shape. But he's like, yeah, we're going to go, and then we're going to get into this whole thing. And they were going to be anti-Antifa or whatever. And, he goes, what do you think? And I said, hey, you read my books. You've trained with me. You know what I think. And he goes, yeah, I probably shouldn't go, should I? I go, I'm not saying you shouldn't go. I'm just saying, the potentiality is once you put yourself in there, you may not have control over the events. And I said, as long as you and your wife are okay with that, I said, that's going to be a huge event. A lot of people, it's a lot of emotion, and people are not going to be thinking clearly. And is it that important to you? Is it that important that you're there protesting, along with her? I understand if it is, but just understand it's my job to tell you about the physical risk you're taking with your life over this situation. If you feel that's warranted, then that's up to you. And, it's rare. It's rare when any of this stuff, like, I can't believe how polarized the country is currently. and that we're letting something as stupid as politics, just do this to us right now, because I'm seeing it from the violent side. I see it from, I mean, some of the attacks on people on all sides of the aisle. It's just crazy what I'm seeing. And so I have to deal with it there. But I look at everything the same. I look at active violence the same way I look at any active violence. Very, it's very much mechanical, and what works, what doesn't work, and it's easy to navigate that way. For me, what's hard for people is when they get swept up in the emotion of something, they get swept up in a cause, and they get into groupthink. And groupthink is really, really dangerous. I think Dave Grossman said it best. I think he said, I was interviewing him one time, and I think he said something along the lines of, individuals love, groups hate. And that's part of the challenge, I think, that you see in situations like that you get involved. Not that you're not thinking, but you can get into a groupthink type of situation where you can, you can get yourself swept up in the situation. I think of that place over in Bosnia Herzegovina, the town where the Muslims and the Christians were fine with each other. They literally were intermarried. They did the whole thing. And then that one day, everybody just got together, and then a guy who's always been your neighbor, all of a sudden you're throwing him over the bridge. I mean, the groupthink happens that fast. And that's the danger when you go to rallies or you go to anything like that, is you might find yourself all of a sudden swept up in a situation. And then by the time you want to get out, you may not have the choice to get out at that point.
Yeah, there's a video going around social media now where there's this gentleman and his daughter. He's dressed up in like Sparta gear or Patriot gear or whatever, and it's an Antifa rally, and they're chasing him out, cussing him out, and and calling him all kinds of names, and in front of his daughter. And I'm like, first thing I thought is, what are you doing there with your daughter? What are you doing there? But what are you doing there with your daughter? Like,
right.
It's and I get you want to demonstrate this, that, and the other, but I think my personal opinion on rallies and protests is the vast majority of the people that are doing the protesting and demonstrating, they're not affected by whatever it is that they're protesting and demonstrating. They really don't give a care. They don't care about the cause, right? Because it's, what are you doing the other 6 days of the week about that, whatever it is that you're protesting? We had there's a officer involved shooting here years ago, and there were some protests and stuff as a result of that. But it's like, what were you guys doing before that? What are you doing after that? What are you doing to hold our local officials accountable if you think that we have this issue within the Albuquerque Police Department? What have you done before? What are you going to do after? Nothing. You're going to go home. You're going to eat your whatever it is that you're going to go on about your business, and you're going to, I did something. No, you didn't. Yeah. You didn't do anything. You made some noise.
And the reality is too that these people that we see on Facebook and social media and these riots and these rallies and all this stuff, to be honest, they're the minority. Most Americans really don't feel this way. We just love to watch it because it's like a car accident. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the reality is these Antifas and these hardcore other ends, they're actually a minority, and we've got to realize that before we can actually start talking to each other. Our next door neighbor, I was driving to work this morning, turning the corner because I kind of cut their neighborhood because there's a school zone that gets packed. And I look over to the left, and there's a car backed in, Moms Demand Action, homemade window shade. And I just, at first I shook my head, and then I'm like, well, you know what? That's whatever. I'm not going to go knock on her door and say she's a complete moron, because I kind of think she does. But the point is, is it worth it? And it's even just going back to your book, for a lot of the stuff that we fight over with the social, antisocial type people, is it worth it? And it's really not.
Yeah, I try to tell people, it's not about being right or wrong. It really isn't, because a lot of those situations are they're transient. It's right now it's important to you. Tomorrow won't be important to you. You're getting caught up in the emotion, but the repercussions of taking action during that time can be a lifelong decision. That can adversely affect you if you don't understand how to control that. And that's why, I really encourage people, especially after going through training with me, that the hard work is after training, when you have to sit down. I tell people, you're sitting down with that cup of coffee by yourself, And you have to start asking yourself those hard questions. You have to say, okay, what am I willing to do? What are the situations that are, that I'll take action on? Because I can't answer that as an instructor. I don't know what your mindset is. I don't know what your thresholds are. Only you can answer those questions. And we all have to do that for each other. We have to sit down and say, okay, what's important to me? What will I take action on? Looking at your whole situation. If you have a family, thinking about that. You have, kids, thinking about what you will and won't expose them to. It's all ties into this. And the great part about it is when you understand the difference between antisocial aggression and asocial violence, it actually is a relief for a lot of people, because they all of a sudden let go of a lot of stuff that they thought they had to respond to. And they go, oh, shoot, I don't have to do that. I don't have to play this game with this guy. I can actually just disengage. And yeah, I'm going to, he'll call me names or, tell me I'm a wuss or whatever, but that's fine. I get the choice on whether or not, this guy's giving me choice. And my choice is always going to be, I'm going to get the hell out of here, because I don't want to have to take action when I don't have to. And that's probably the thing that most people don't understand, because they get caught up with the idea of being the hero and fighting, and they have all sorts of these ideas about what it's like to use violence, and the vast majority of it is wrong. I tell people all the time, all violence is good for is ending communication. That's it. That's why so many people hit at the face, because they're trying to shut you up. Whereas a true professional will go after the body and go after areas of the body that actually get a result. There are areas in the face that you can get really good results on, but oftentimes what people are trying to do is they're trying to hit to the face to shut the person up, because it's an antisocial aggression situation. Those are probably the biggest things that especially navigating the world as it is today, more so than in my 27 years of doing this. This information has never been more needed by the general public than right now, because we're being amped up by everybody. The media is amping us up. Everything's about emotion. Everything's about outrage. And if you get caught up in it, you can end up making some really poor decisions.
Yeah, and people don't realize that a 30-second emotional decision can affect them for the rest of their life. Both sides of it. If you're the aggressor, you lose your cool. Now you're going to spend some time in jail. And now you have a record. It's not. Very few things are worth it, right? And the biggest thing I want to instill people is, if you're not willing to die for something, don't put yourself in a position where you have to kill for it. We see it all too often here in Albuquerque, where verbal altercations lead to physical altercations. Next thing you know, somebody's getting shot over a parking lot or a parking spot in the Walmart parking lot. And I used to tell students that, I'd be like, man, it's going to sound silly. Like, it's going to be hard to believe that somebody's going to get shot over a parking spot. But there are literal cases where that's the exact cause of a shooting in a Walmart parking lot or at another parking lot. And it's a shame that we're at such a point in time where there's so little regard and respect for life. And that's why it's critical for your information to get out there. In the book, When Violence is the Answer, is a great read that we can't recommend highly enough for our students, our loved ones, our friends and our family, and everybody else. If you hate my guts, go out there and buy this book, because it's going to have some great information for you. I listened to it on Audible a couple times. Andy's digested on Audible. I think for me, that's the easiest way for me. If somebody wanted to buy a hard copy of your book, where can they pick it up?
Amazon. Amazon's the easiest place to do it. If they go, though, and I would encourage you guys too, if you haven't done this, if you go to whenviolenceistheanswer.com, just the title of the book, I set that up. Amazon wouldn't let me do it, but if you just put your email address in there and just, the receipt from Amazon or wherever you bought the book, we send you access to 10 modules that I did, one module for each video module for each chapter, and it's free. It's completely free, that I just did just extra information. I give more visuals and just really good information for people. And I do that as a thank you, because, and thanking you guys, because this is I understand that your podcast is set up to deal with subjects like this, but man, people don't want to talk about the potentiality for violence. They don't even want to talk about the subject for the most part. And having opportunity to do a long form interview like this and allowing to share the message is really cool. And if you liked if your folks liked what they heard, I would just encourage them just to go to whenviolenceistheanswer.com and get the book that way, so they can get access to their free, it's almost like 10 hours worth of material they can get.
Awesome. We'll include that in the show notes. You have some other online training available, is that correct?
Yeah. We have our virtual training center is up. It's being we're almost done with the final revamping of it. It's active now, but we're upgrading the platform. And I'm really excited about that, because that allows me to do, you can only reach so many people live, and being able to leverage and not dilute the quality of the instruction. That's the hardest part. Is if I just went out and did cookie cutter instructors and did weekend certifications, the material just would, you wouldn't have the same effect. So I only put master instructors in on my group, and everything's done by my best people, including myself. And that to me is really important, because I'm not going to be able to reach everybody, but at least they can get access to the information at a really reasonable cost.
If somebody wanted to sign up for the online training, where would they go for that?
TargetFocusTraining.com, my main website. We'll take it. It's right there. Yeah.
Awesome. Perfect. And we'll have all that stuff linked in the show notes and in the comment section on the different posts on the different platforms. Right. Tim, I think we could easily go for another hour and a half, and we really do appreciate you spending as much time with us as you have tonight. Hopefully, if you ever want to come back on the show, we'd love to have you. If you want to get a couple students from one of your live in training courses, we'd love to have that. That's typically the format of our show is we get an instructor on here with a student or two and kind of go through that, do a deep dive in that course from the student's perspective, and then kind of get the instructor's thought process and dig into their brain and why they do certain things in the class the way they do. And we've started to do the book review format mainly so that we can hold ourselves accountable to getting outside of just going to the range, shooting guns, but really get the great information that's out there and available for everybody at a very low cost. For the cost of the book, the information that's in there is a summation of your 27 plus years experience doing it. And so there's a great benefit to that. So, but we'd love to have you back on the show whenever you'd like to join us. And then timlarkin.com, whenviolenceistheanswer.com. And what was the other one?
Oh, just targetfocustraining.com. Any one of those will get you to any of the other stuff.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, we appreciate it.
Just to let you guys just real quick, if any people that watch this end up sending you guys questions or follow-ups, I'd be happy to answer them. So just send them my way.
Awesome. Perfect. We appreciate that. And we also appreciate everybody jumping on. Remember, it's your life. It's your safety and protection. It's your responsibility. We'll see y'all next week.
Thanks, guys.
Man, we really hope you enjoyed listening to that episode as much as we did interviewing and having our guests on. Be sure to share this with your friends and family and head over to patreon.com/afteractionproject. We'd love to have you on as a guest panelist, and be sure to check out those other rewards that we have for our Patreons.
If you're a recent graduate of a firearms-related training course and would like to join us on our show, or if you'd like us to review a specific firearm-related training course or instructor, shoot an email to show@afteractionproject.com. Remember to join a local firearms advocacy organization. As always, stay safe, shoot straight, and remember to secure your firearms so that unauthorized persons cannot gain access to them.